Okay, so this is part two of the GDP presentation that I have. So just so you know, I can see the analytics for who's actually watched this video, and I can tell that you guys aren't watching it. And you're not going to understand GDP just by taking the notes. You actually need to listen to what I'm saying in order to understand this concept because I give you examples, and it's kind of hard to understand this just by reading about it. Okay, so you guys need to stop playing around and get and start doing your work. All right, so we left off with production approach. There are three approaches to calculating GDP. The first is production approach, and we've already covered that. That was on the first page. So this is when they look at, we only look at final products. So we don't look at intermediate um, products. So in the assignment that you did today, one of the samples or the questions was, Ben and Jerry's goes and buys milk to create ice cream. Is this a part of GDP? The answer to that was no, because the milk is intermediate. The milk is not the final product. Now, if they said something like Ben and Jerry sold ice cream, the ice cream is the final product, not the milk. The milk is the intermediate product. Okay? All right, so then there's the expenditure approach, and this is when they count up all the money spent on goods. So there are four different categories of what was spent. There's consumption. So this is like when we look at money that's spent on services. For example, like in your activity today, is this a part of a GDP? The first part was, is a haircut part of GDP? And the answer to that is yes, because it's a final good of a service and you paid for that. So if you're a woman, you go get your nails done, that's a service and that's counted into GDP. What's not counted into GDP is all the ingredients it took to make the nails or whatever. Um, so you have to be careful with this. Investments, we will count spending as investment if in GDP, if it's something like if a company has, um, how do I put this? Uh, so it means if they have bought like final products. Okay, so let me give an example. All those houses are being built around Harlan High School right now. So let's say a business or one of the builders goes out and they buy a new cat machine, like one of those big backhoes to build something. Then that is counted into GDP because it's a final product and it's considered an investment because a company actually invested in buying that, and it's helping them create houses, which is going to be another final product counted into GDP. Okay. Then there's the government. The government spends a ton of money on final products. The government actually purchases so many things, weapons, well, not even just weapons. I mean, if you think about you're in a public school that's run by state government, right? It's purchased books, it pays teachers, it does all kinds of things. So a government spends a lot. So when we look at what's being spent and we're adding it all up, we can say in this part of GDP, this is government spending, or this is just consumers, like people consuming things like haircuts or movies, or like going to the movies, things like that. And then we can also count something as net exports. Remember, imports absolutely are never, ever, ever counted. For instance, if I were the shirt that I'm wearing now, if I looked at the tag, it probably would say made in India or made in China. So this shirt, when I bought it, did not go towards the US GDP. Even though I bought it in a US store, it goes to India's GDP or China's GDP, wherever that's from. We never count imports. It's because it's not our product. It's another country's product. And then there's the income approach. So this is a third way to calculate each GDP. And so we can look at like how much we count GDP in terms of how much people are making. So if I know that I have it here in that activity, is this a part of GDP? It says let's see, Macy's pays its employees an hourly wage. Well, if they're paying their employees a wage, then yes, that is counted into GDP. Okay. Um, there is, so interest is, this is hard to say. So, um, okay, so let's, uh, gosh. All right. Sometimes when the bank, like, let's say the bank loans money to buy a new house, the bank charges interest. That is going to be counted as their final product when that loan is paid off. That interest in that is considered part of GDP. Um, Now, when we come to rents, that's here as well. Rents are tricky. If you are renting a house, that's not counted into GDP. If you're renting land that you're using to produce something, like farmland, that's counted into GDP. So it gets a little tricky here. In profit, of course, wages, interest, rents, all the extra. Like if you're a business and you have profit, that is counted into GDP and only in the income approach. Okay. Now this is where this is going to get a little confusing. So please make sure that you follow along. There are there is two types of ways of looking at GDP. There's nominal and then there's real. And the reason that we look at it in two different ways is because when you're comparing from year to year, um, it inflation will sometimes blow up your GDP. It'll make it look like you're being more productive than you actually are. So let me pull this all up here at once so you can see and start counting and start writing down your notes. Okay, so real GDP, this is going to tell us the change in how much is produced per year. So that's what we really want to know. Like how much products are we actually producing? How many services are we selling? How many loans are being given out? These are things that we need to count because that's a good indicator of how the economy is doing. So, for example, so here, look at this. And then let's look at year 1 to year 2. In the first year, let's say you own an orchard and you are going to take 50 apples to the market. That year was a really good year for apple growers because the weather was just perfect. And so therefore, there's a lot of competition and you're only able to sell your apples for $1 an apple. Okay, so your nominal GDP that year is $50 because you made $1 per apple. Your real GDP is $50 because you made $1 per apple. However, when you get to year 2 here, so let's say that year you had a good year because you took care of your orchard, but maybe there was drought other places and the apples just didn't do so well. So you managed to take 60 apples to the market here. You get more. And since there's less apples in competition, you can charge more. So you charge $2 an apple. So that year, if you just look at nominal GDP, it looks like you've made $120. So it's 2 times 60. But if you compare these 2 years, if you compare 50 to 120, it looks like you have you've taken a ton more apples to the market. And if we're really wanting to only look at products, we have to take out price. So you have to take out the change in price because we want to know not how much you made, but how many apples actually went to the market. Okay? So what you do is you take the year 2 quantity, which is 60, and you multiply it times the price in the first year. So that means that in year 2, there was only your real GDP is $60. So GDP only grew by $10. That's a more accurate picture of of production in this scenario. Okay? If we just look at money, then it looks like, man, we're really producing a lot of apples. But that's not the case. It was just the price changing, right? Okay. So as you can see from this chart as well, you can see the drastic difference between real GDP and nominal GDP. So you can see why we really want to look at real GDP, because we're trying to measure the stuff that we're actually producing. We're not trying to measure how much money we're making, because that's not always a good indicator. I mean, we do want to measure that, but if you're only measuring how much money that the country is bringing in, it doesn't take into account like wealth disparity. Like you can have, let's say Amazon makes billions of dollars more next year. That's going to make our GDP look amazing, right? But who gets that money? It's not the entire country. It's Jeff Bezos, right? So there can definitely be discrepancies. All right, so then we just went over this. Let me go back. If you want to figure out, like in the country, so for each country, you can figure out like what their GDP per capita is. Now, why would you do this? Because this is a good way to see like at what level the society is at. So for instance, if I was looking at Nigeria, their per capita GDP is probably much lower than the US GDP, because the US per capita GDP, the US has a massive GDP per year, right? So what you would do is you would take the real GDP, you would divide it by the population of the country, and then that's the number that you would get. So you see this 49,000. This is this isn't outdated. Right now, our real GDP is about 57,000 per capita. That doesn't mean that every single person is making $57,000 a year. It just means on average, that's how much money there is distributed for each person. Of course, that doesn't mean we're all getting that. That wealth is concentrated in different places. But we have a better style of living than other countries. I believe Nigeria it's probably their GDP per capita is probably like $3,000 to $4,000. So as compared to ours, that means that we're per capita, we've got $50,000 more per person, meaning we have a lot of wealth and we are living pretty well. Okay. So our GDP in the United States has been steadily growing over time. You can see a dip here. This is right about 2008. This is during the recession. But since the recession, the economy has been growing very steadily, and we have an economy that's booming right now. We've got 3.5% unemployment rate. It's great, except that we have a lot of wealth disparity. The money is concentrated at the top, which is not really good. Now, there are some countries that are struggling, mostly, of course, in Africa, which is, that's a result of colonialism. It'll take a long time for that continent to come back after it was exploited for so long. And then in the Asian world, they definitely have a lower income per capita than most of the rest, or as compared to the rest of the world. And a part of that has to do with population. I mean, there's 1 billion people in China, and there's 1 billion people in India. So you have to have a lot of money in order for your per capita GDP to go up, because there's just so many darn people, right? That's what, when analysts are looking at data like this, and when people are trying to come up with government policy, and we look at GDP and we look at population growth, if the population is growing too fast, that's definitely a problem. Because it can hurt your productivity in the long run, because you won't have enough food, you won't have enough anything to feed your people or to keep them living well. So in the 1970s, this actually was happening in China. China saw that their population was growing faster than their GDP. So that's why they came up with their one-child policy, because they knew they had to slow down their population growth. India tried to do this as well, but they did it in a very bad way. They tried to forcibly sterilize women. So ever since then, it's been really hard to do any sort of population control, because people are so distrustful of that. They're afraid they're going to get sterilized on purpose, and they don't go to the doctors. It's awful. So there are different ways to calculate GDP. And so now you're going to do a homework assignment. You're going to bring it all together, and you're going to figure out how to calculate GDP. So I'm going to go over this with you. Make sure that you are listening because this can be confusing. I remember last year my students got a little confused. And of course, I will answer questions for you in my classroom if you need. There is no excuse for you to just say it was confusing and I'm not going to do it. I heard that today. I did this assignment, but it was confusing. And then I realized that they didn't even watch the video. So I have a little over 90 economics students. I can tell 39, I had 39 views on the video, which means that you guys didn't watch it. Make sure you tell your friends and tell the people around you, you have to watch it or you're not going to understand it. All right, so this is your GDP homework. You should have it in front of you. You should have picked it up at the door as you came in today. So the first chart, number 1, is giving you 2 charts, and it's telling you to figure out the nominal GDP for year 1 and year 2. This is very straightforward. The first line where it says cookies, you're just going to multiply 2 times 50, and that's 100. Then where it says donuts, you're going to multiply 5 times 35. And that's 175. Oh, I should look at the key. I'm so bad at math in my head. But I will look it up because I'm sure you guys are like, what's the answer? Yes, I was right. 175. And then the cake, it's 10 times 15, which is 115. So you're going to do that for both charts. Now, when you get to 2, it says, now calculate the real GDP for year 2 using year 1 as the base year. So what you're going to do, and that's in the chart that's here, okay? You are going to put in the price from year 1 chart. So under cookies, you're going to put $2. Under donuts, you're going to put 5, and under cake, you're going to put 10. And then you multiply and you get that amount. Because remember, we're not concerned about the change in price when we're looking at real GDP. We're only concerned about how many more were produced. Okay? So then you're going to be comparing the charts after you finish that. Now, make sure in these charts here, at the bottom, it's asking you, circle the country you would expect to have a higher GDP per capita based on its location. It's not the whole chart. Like line A, you have to choose between Germany or Kenya. Line B, you choose between China or the United States, and so on. And the next page, you're going to do the same thing. It's asking you which one lists a final good and which one is an intermediate good, and circle the one that gets included in GDP. So let's look at the first line. It says A, so it's line A, wheat, flour, and bread. Wheat and flour are the intermediate products that go into making bread. So the bread is what's counted into GDP, not the wheat and flour. Okay, let's do another one. Let's go to F. I'm going to skip around here. Book, paper, ink, and binding material. So paper, ink, and binding material are all intermediate products that go into making the book. So you would circle book because that's what's going to be counted into GDP. All right. So then when you get to, don't overthink number 6. Remember that we only count final products. Number 7, you just have to put in, like when this is counted in GDP, all these things are counted in GDP, but you have to identify them. Is it consumption? Is it investment? Is it government? Or is it net exports? Okay? Same thing for number 9. You just have to identify it. Is it wages, interest, rent, or profit? Okay? Number 8 and number 10, you're going to have to do some math, and I'm going to let you try to figure that out on your own. And if you get stuck, then I will be in and out of the classroom to check on people and answer questions as much as I possibly can. All right, please guys, I take my time to do this. Please, you need to take your time to learn this stuff so that way you won't be a completely ignorant adult when you graduate, and you'll have at least some basic knowledge of how the economy works, because it is something that affects you on a daily basis. So watch the videos, do your work, don't be playing around, use your time wisely, make good choices. All right, get to work.